Thank you all so much tonight for joining us for best-selling author Robert Dugoni, along with co-authors Jeff Langholz and Chris Crabtree. They're here to discuss their new World War II novel, Hold Strong, and the latest installment of Author Hour in Massachusetts. First, I'll introduce Robert. Robert is the New York Times best-selling author of the Tracy Crosswhite series, the Charles Jenkins series, the David Sloane series, and several standalone novels, including A Killing on the Hill, The World Played Chess, and The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell. He is also the co-author of the nonfiction exposé, The Cyanide Canary, a Washington Post Best Book of the Year. Robert is the recipient of the Nancy Pearl Book Award for Fiction, a multi-time winner of the Friends of Mystery Spotted Owl Award for Best Novel Set in the Pacific Northwest, and a finalist for many, many other awards. His books are sold in more than 25 countries, has been translated into more than 30 languages, and have reached millions of readers worldwide. So next up is Jeff, who's an award-winning teacher, researcher, entrepreneur, and writer, whose work has appeared in more than 250 media outlets. His adventures span 5 continents and include stints as a rice farmer in West Africa with the Peace Corps, a Fulbright scholar in South Africa, a salmon fisherman in Alaska, a tree farmer in Central America, and a mediator in New York. He lives along Monterey Bay in California. I'm going to say Monterey Bay in California. And finally, Chris Crabtree teaches middle and high school English language arts and literature at the Costa Rica International Academy. Chris and his wife Vera live in a rustic rural town on the outskirts of Santa Cruz, Costa Rica, with their dogs, Betty and Bruno. So with all that said, folks, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Jeff, Chris, and Robert for being with us tonight. And Jeff, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
All right, Robert, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I see in the chat, people are signing in from Louisiana, New Jersey, and various other locations. It's wonderful to have you. Thank you for supporting Tewksbury Library and the 40 partner libraries and Wellesley Bookstore, who are all part of tonight's event as well. I'm joined in spirit by my grandfather, who's in the picture with the tank back there. He was a World War I tank instructor in Fort Knox, Kentucky, training soldiers how to run tanks and then fix them, and ended up serving in World War II in Europe as well. And the tanks play a role in our book. Speaking of our book, we're talking about Hold Strong by Robert Dugoni, Chris Crabtree, and myself. And you'll be hearing from all of the authors tonight. I think we'll start off with Bob. And the first question to Bob is, could you just tell us a little bit about what this story is about and what makes it different from so many other World War II books that are out there?
Yeah, I think the thing that really separates this book from many of the others that are out there are you two gentlemen, Jeff and Chris. I think readers are most taken by the fact that they're reading this story, which seems unbelievable, and yet they can then go to all the notes and credits and see that you research and you guys pulled together and see that it's true, that these things really did happen. It's a story that I like to say starts out as sort of a little bit of It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart. And then it becomes a little bit like the movie Unbroken. And it then becomes a little bit like the movie The Codebreakers, or The Imitation Game, excuse me. It is at its heart a love story. It's a story of 2 young people growing up in a small town in Minnesota. One is a movie projectionist. The other is a math whiz in school. And their plan is to get married and to run the family's dairy farm. But the depression hits, and Sam needs to get a job. His father can't support him anymore. And they know that war is looming in Europe. He joins the National Guard, and he's off and running from there. He ends up in the Philippines, in the Bataan Death March, in the prisoner of war camps, and eventually on this story that's never been told, on these Japanese transport ships called Marus, in which he's basically a captive. Sarah, meanwhile, goes off to Washington, D.C. and becomes a code breaker, which many young women did from schools back east. And really the overriding question of the story is, will they ever make it back home, and will they ever find love? And it's really, truly a remarkable testament to the research that you two did to bring this story out to the public.
Well, thank you, Bob, for that overview and for your kind words. It truly was a team effort to bring this story to light. The team started with just one person, and that's Chris Crabtree. Chris, would you be willing to tell us the origin story? How on earth did this project begin? When, where, how? Especially with reference to one of the characters who plays a central role, an Army chaplain named Father Thomas Cecina.
Right, and thanks to everybody for looking in on us, and thanks, Bob, for that for your kindness. Listen, there wasn't a time in my life that I did not know the name Father Thomas Cecina. I was born and raised on the east side of Indianapolis. My education was pretty much laid out for me, and I followed the template of my three older brothers, Mark, Matthew, and Kyle, and so I pretty much knew I was going to do my 8 years in St. Simon the Apostle Catholic school, and I was going to spend 4 years at Father Thomas Cecina Memorial High School. What I didn't know, and until a little more than a decade ago, is how important this particular Catholic priest was to a great number of souls. And so I embarrassingly tripped over this story that I thought I knew, and saw that Father Tom, I don't know, he's such a special individual, and his story needed to be told because he brought something to some troubled men at a very, very difficult time. So I happened to be talking to my friend Jeff, who I've known since the mid '80s when we were in the Peace Corps together in Sierra Leone, and he was visiting down here in Costa Rica, and we were sitting in a bar, and we began to speak, and I decided to tell him about this story that I had come across and that I had decided to write. And as I was discussing it with him, and we're actually just telling it with him, I saw him change right in front of me and look at me with some puzzled eyes. And I'm just going to pass it right back to Jeff, because it was kind of right there that this metamorphosis started to happen.
All right, Chris, well, I can take the story from there. We're sitting in a bar in Costa Rica by the beach. We're drinking a beer. He tells me this story, and I about spit up my beer. And I said, this is incredible. Tell me the whole story. I ordered another round of drinks and asked him to tell me everything he knew. And it was just absolutely stunning. Perhaps like a lot of you, I thought I knew all the great stories from World War II. I thought that I've seen everything Tom Hanks has done, Steven Spielberg, before them, John Wayne and Clint Eastwood. I've read the books, seen the movies, and I thought I had seen them all. And then along comes this incredible, powerful, epic, true story. And I was shocked. I was also embarrassed, because I was a history major in college. I studied military history. I took a whole class on World War II. Yet somehow, this whole chapter in the Pacific of these prisoner transport ships called hell ships had slipped through the cracks, not just of me, but everybody. And on that day, I vowed we need to bring this story to the world. And so spent the next several years working with Chris, researching the story, pulling together pieces of the puzzle, especially a lot of declassified military documents that are buried in the National Archives, and then pieces of the puzzle that are in the Philippines, old historic photos, letters from survivors, a small village in Japan, in China, various locations, trying to bring the story together and then craft it as a novel as well. And then, fortunately, we were able to attract a master storyteller to the team, somebody who has been doing this for decades, somebody who is just at the peak of his game right now to help bring this story to the world. And with that, I'll pass it off to Bob. Bob, would you be willing to tell our audience how and why you joined the team?
Yeah, Jeff was in a writing class that I teach, a seminar that I teach called the Novel Writing Intensive, and I read the first 50 pages of this story, and I was, I immediately fell in love with Sam. I mean, he's a movie projectionist in a small little town. The town is dying during the Depression, and these movies of Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, they bring hope to this community. They give them hope. They can, for 10 cents, they can go in and get out of the sun and get out of the heat, and watch this fantasy evolving right on stage. So I immediately fell in love with Sam and with Sarah Haber. And I said to Jeff, if the rest of the story holds together as well as these first 50 pages, I could help him get an agent. And Jeff said, well, thanks, but we already have an agent. And I said, oh, who's your agent? And he said, Meg Ruley. And I said, Meg's been my agent for 30 years. And he said, I know. And I said, well, you're in good hands. You guys are in good hands. And I don't know how long it was after that, but there was a period of time passed, and somebody reached out to me and said, this story is a phenomenal story, and the amount of work that has gone into it, it really needs to be a story that's told. Would you be willing? And my initial reaction was no, and that had nothing to do with the story. It just had to do with a couple of things. One was I had my own projects that I was working on and trying to bring to fruition. And the other was I didn't want to step on any toes. This is Jeff and Chris's story, and they've worked hard for it. And I wanted to give them every opportunity possible to bring it to fruition, like I would want to have. But eventually, they basically, I think the thing that really swayed it to me was two things. One was Jeff said to me, they wanted the level of writing to match the level of research. And I don't know if that's possible, to be honest with you. The level of research is beyond superb. But I felt, I didn't realize that these two men had devoted 12 years of their life to this book and to this story. And I just felt that they deserved to have the story told, number one. And number two, the men, predominantly the men who died in World War II, deserved to have this story told. And the women who supported these men and supported the war effort, like Sarah Haber, they deserve to have this story told. And that's really what convinced me to get involved and try to elevate the story, the writing, to the level of the research.
Well, we are so grateful that you agreed to join the team. Bob is a busy guy, and he's living proof of the old saying, if you want something done, ask a busy person. Bob helped grab the baton and ran with it like crazy, and we are so grateful. Just to underscore Bob's point, when you have an incredible story like this, you want the quality of the storytelling to match the quality of the underlying story. And I think with Bob's great help, we've accomplished that. Bob, could you just talk about the ratings and reviews really quickly? I heard you chatting about them earlier. How are readers responding to the story?
Yeah, I think the highest rating that I've ever received on Amazon was maybe a 4.7, maybe for Sam Hell, but I don't think I got that high. And on Goodreads, which is usually a tougher market, the rankings are usually a little bit lower, 4.5, 4.6, and for me, 4.5 or 4.6 is outstanding. This book is at 4.8 after a week of being out, and after a lot of reviews have already come in, and I honestly don't think it's going to fall below that. The people that are emailing me, the people that are putting up reviews, are all saying the same thing, which is this story is unbelievable. It should be taught in schools. It should be taught in colleges and high schools, and anybody in this generation should read about the greatest generation and what it meant to be the greatest generation, and what it means that freedom is not free. It's been fought by the lives of the men and women that have fought for us. So it's.
Whoops, sorry.
I think Bob froze up.
Oh, Bob might have froze there.
And have people out there saying they want to know more about it. So my thanks to all of you for coming and listening to the story.
Thank you. Thank you for that overview. And let's turn now to the central story at the core of this book that's getting such phenomenal ratings from readers. Bob mentioned the two main characters, Sam and Sarah. They're high school sweethearts in the upper Midwest. I'd like to talk a little bit about Sam and his path, and then turn it back to Bob to talk about Sarah Haber in particular. But when it comes to this couple here, Hold Strong is a love story between Sam and Sarah. But it's not just one type of love, romantic. It's also love among friends. There's a deep sisterhood between Sarah and her friend and Sam and his. There's also love of family. There's also love of country and love of God. So if you're somebody who can't get enough love in your life, we've got 5 types of love in this story for you. Now, Sam, after he finishes high school, joins the National Guard. As Bob said, he gets pulled into World War II, and we decided to make him a composite character representing the soldiers who were fighting in the Pacific, especially those who became POWs in the Philippines, and even smaller group who were put onto these Japanese prisoner transport ships that POWs called hell ships because of the hellish conditions. There were 134 of these ships around the Pacific during World War II, and each of them deserves to be a book or a movie unto itself. But the one we're focusing on is called the Arasan Maru. And while Sam is going through this ordeal on this Japanese hell ship, Sarah finishes high school as well and starts her own journey. And Bob, could you take it from there and tell us a little bit about the Sarah character, what she does, and how you develop that character?
Yeah, Jeff, absolutely. So when I came into this story, there was a story of Sam and Sarah was in there as well. And I started doing a little bit of research on Sarah and on code breakers. And what I came to realize is that as is portrayed in the story, and as Chris and Jeff had researched, most women would graduate from these schools back east, and they would become teachers because that was really the only occupation that was available to most of them. And here you had Sarah, who was going off to what's now Minnesota State to get a teaching credential. And she's going to go back to their small town and she's going to teach math. And I just started thinking, who is this woman really? I mean, who is she at her core, at her interior? What is motivating her? Why is she the way that she is? And I started to just look into the women who became code breakers and what they were good at, what their motivation was, what led them to do it. I wanted to know who her family was. I wanted to know what her place was in the town back then. I wanted her to know if she was a little rambunctious, if she was like Sam, where she was willing to, do some things a little out of the ordinary. With an incredible foundation, I really found a wonderful character in Sarah, and she's a young woman who decides I want to do more for the war, and I want to do more for Sam. I want to bring Sam home someday, and so she goes off into the Navy and she becomes a code breaker. She's working in Washington D.C. She's incredibly naive, but she's also incredibly intuitive and incredibly smart, and she soon begins to figure out a lot of the things that a lot of the other women are taking longer to do. She's very good at what she's doing. And so there's opportunities for promotion there. There's also temptations there. She hasn't heard from Sam. This isn't the day of cell phones and text messages. She hasn't heard from Sam in years. She doesn't know if he's alive or he's dead. She just knows he's a POW. Is she wasting her life? She's a young woman. Should she move on? Should she not move on? She doesn't know. She's in this area of uncertainty. And then it all comes sort of full circle in an incredible true story of a submarine path and the ship and Sarah's influence in it, and it's almost breathtaking. I mean, when I'm reading it, it's almost breathtaking. And we had a review by the Associated Press, and they even said it. They said when you get to that last 150 pages. And you're on that submarine, it's like a Tom Clancy novel. It's unrelenting. It's unstoppable. It keeps going. And guess what? It's all true. It's really amazing. So it was a thrill to be able to create Sarah.
It is true. It is true. And just picking up right there, Sam's path and Sarah's path, they're in separate parts of the world, but they collide in an important way, a dramatic fashion. And without giving up too much of the story, what if the deadliest accident in U.S. military history, a friendly fire incident that killed nearly 1,800 of our own American soldiers, wasn't an accident. I'll leave it at that. Chris, perhaps you could pick it up here and tell us a little bit about the true story and why on earth we didn't write this as a nonfiction book, like Unbroken or something else. Why go fiction and write it as a novel? And then even bigger gluttons for punishment, why include 480 some endnotes at the end that document the true underlying story chapter by chapter? That's so strange for novelists to do.
Right, right. And that's has to be like at the core of a lot of questions, because when you add that, 470 plus endnotes, it seems like it lends itself more to a history book than to a novel. But we really wanted to say more than just a history book could say, because inside the Erasan Maru were more than 1,800 plus souls who had lives, who had stories that needed to be told. And it seemed that the best way for us to actually get inside and try to bring a reader inside to experience some of the trauma, the triumphs, the pitfalls of these soldiers' daily lives, and those back home that are working really, really hard to bring these POWs home, and to win a war, and all these things coming together. It seemed the best way to do this is to try to make a reader feel it, and perhaps if it would have been nonfiction, we would not have been able to tell the emotional side of the story with the same kind of prowess as we did the factual side of the story. And in so doing, I think that we were able to, I don't know, put on. Well, they didn't even have shoes, but to kind of bring a reader inside the hull of the Erasan Maru, inside the hull of the USS Shark, and inside of some of the top and most difficult decisions in the Pacific Theater. And let me also add that the Pacific Theater is less talked about, less written about, less experienced. And it also gave us the opportunity to kind of take the veil off of not just some of the incidents there, but the Pacific Theater in general.
Great. Thank you for that. My next question is going to go to Bob, and it's also to go to our audience. If you've read The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell, if you would be so kind as just note that in the chat. I'm curious how many of you have read it and what you thought of it. But I'd like to ask Bob how he goes about creating such extraordinary characters. If you've read this story and Bob's other stories, like his Vietnam War book, The World Played Chess, you know that one of his special talents is creating unforgettable characters. Just a full confession here. When Chris and I wrote the first versions of this story, Hold Strong, Sam and Sarah, readers liked them. In fact, they liked them a lot, but they didn't love them. And we wanted readers to love our characters, and that's where Bob Dugoni comes in. And I see the chats are coming in. People like Sam Hell and The World Played Chess. Fantastic. All right, Bob, what's the magic? What's the secret here? How do you write these characters that are unforgettable, who people just love?
Well, I wish I could tell you. I mean, I really do. I wish I could. I always tell my students when I'm teaching that that their characters are not them, because I think that when you think that people are going to think the character is you, then you hold back. And you don't write it raw and unfiltered and honestly, because you're worried about, your mom's going to read it, your dad's going to read it, your wife or husband's going to read it, your significant other's going to read it, and they're going to think you're a weirdo. You have these weird thoughts and weird, but that's what being a human being is. A human being is someone that's flawed. The older I get, the more I realize we all have issues, we all have problems, we're all dealing with something. I've yet to meet anyone that was perfect, whose life was perfect. And that's the kind of thing that I try to instill in my characters, that it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to have problems. It's okay to be working through things and trying to find the answer and what it is. So what I tell my students is every character is not you, but it is of you. And therefore they should reflect in some shape or form the things that you have brought to the table through all the experiences that you've had in your life. And everybody, all these authors, all the people in the chat room, all of you, you all have had different lives. You all have different perspectives because of the lives you've had. And those are important in bringing characters to life is letting that sort of shine through. And that's what I mean when I say write raw and unfiltered and honest. Don't write with anyone on your shoulder. Just write it and put it down and let the character come alive. Let them be a real human being. And if you do that, you will find people that fall in love with those characters because they can identify with them, and not only identify with them, they can empathize with them because they're having the same problems and the same issues that those characters are having.
Extraordinary. I'm glad we recorded that because that was beautiful. All right. Thanks for that, Bob. Chris, next question comes to you. Speaking of imperfections in characters, this novel most novels have one author, some have two, but this one had three. Could you describe how on earth the collaboration happened? Just the mechanics of it, anything that went well, especially well or not so well? Tell us about how the process worked.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. It's not sexy. It's not sexy. I mean, when I came up with the idea and I started writing, I was writing scenes. I was writing some dialogue about the Bataan Death March and some of the other major events and trying to do outlines and that sort of thing. And when you and I started working on it together, and for the authors out there, please, don't take this as a lesson like Bob just gave us on characterization on a collaboration, because this is not it. Basically, Jeff and I started passing back and forth pieces of writing and pieces of research back and forth. So I would be reading something, he would be writing something, then he would be digging deeper and pulling out more things that became part of a construct to do the story. And our writing were on Word documents that we passed through Messenger, through back and forth and back and forth. And we had come through this with a couple different iterations of what became Hold Strong-ish, or Hold Strong Heavy, or Hold Strong Light, I guess would be a better way to put it. And I think that everybody who's read The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell, like I did, can see why somebody like myself, who was really trying to, whose main focus in building this story was to honor this incredible Catholic priest. And I suspect that when you read, those of you who've read Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell would know that why, when I read it, I was like, wow, if this guy can be part of our team, I know that Father Tom is going to be in safe hands and loving hands. And that's literally what happened. I wept during Sam Hell, and I weep every time I page through Hold Strong.
Thank you for that, Chris. It's a powerful story. And again, just to underscore what Chris said, the modern technology has all these wonderful collaboration tools. Teams can work together across time and halfway around the globe. And we used absolutely none of those modern technological tools. We just did it the old school way. Bob, next question is coming your way. Can you tell us a little more about the magic, how you write stories, the process? Some of our audience members may be novelists or aspiring novelists, or they may be like me that didn't plan on becoming a novelist and just the story found you and refused to let go. What are some of your top tips for novelists or aspiring novelists?
Well, the first thing I always say is put your butt in the chair. I just know too many people that they say they're novelists and they write for an hour and then they go to Starbucks and get a coffee and then they come back and they play with the dog and that's not a novelist. That's a hobby. Um,
Yeah.
a novelist, you have to put your butt in the chair. You have to put the hours in, and you two now know what that means. I mean, they're long, arduous hours. And when you're getting started, you're doing this when you're tired after you've taught a full day of classes to high school students. That can be really difficult, or to college students who are looking to get their degrees. I mean, it's a really difficult thing to do, but you have to find time to put your butt in the chair. The second thing I always tell people is you have to understand story structure. You can say, I'm an artist. I don't need any structure. And I always say, there's the wall. Go bang your head against it because that you're going to get the same result. The two greatest artists in the history of mankind, Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, were first and foremost researchers. First and foremost, they researched everything they ever did. They researched the human anatomy, the human body, every muscle in the body, how it worked, how it moved. They didn't just pick up a chisel and start chiseling a stone and create the David. I mean, they were incredible learners. And so go out and get the book, The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. Go out and get Saul Stein's book on writing. Go out and get Save the Cat and understand story structure. Understand how stories have been told from the very beginning of time. And when it becomes innate to you, okay, and that takes a while. It takes a few books. But when it becomes innate to you, then you can put yourself in a position where you don't have to outline. Because for me, not for everybody, but for me, outlining is constricting. It's like a basketball court that the players have to play on. And my characters feel much more comfortable when they can just come to me and say, I have a story to tell you. And I'm going to tell you that story, and there's characters in it, and they're going to talk to you. And it's interesting, but Charles Dickens wrote the same way. And he was under tremendous pressure to get a book done, a Christmas book done. He had gotten a contract for it, but he had no idea what he was going to write. And he had a lot of bills coming up because he had a lot of children. He's remodeling the house. And suddenly Scrooge walks into his office and says, bah humbug. And he just listened to this man start to tell him this story. So I think there's a lot of validity in that. Stephen King writes a book on writing, and he talks about the magic of writing and telepathy, all those things. So whatever you want to call it, you have to place yourself in a position and be willing to listen to a character tell you their story and not try to direct them too much, because then you lose sort of the honesty of that story that's being told to you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. As someone who has taken 2 of Bob's fiction writing workshops, I can tell you there's a lot more where that came from. That was a good advertisement for those. He's a master teacher as well as writer. The next question has to do with the cinematic nature of the story. We've noticed that in a lot of the reviews, including the Associated Press article that ran in dozens of papers a couple days ago and several countries, comment on just how cinematic the story is, how it's ready-made for Hollywood. Just add water and stir, and it's ready to be a limited series on a streaming network or a movie. Can you, one or both of you, just chime in on the cinematic nature of this story?
Chris, go ahead.
Okay. It was completely by accident. I mean, we had no idea that this would make a good movie. No, I obviously, from the beginning, it seemed to lend itself towards being a cinematic. I just think it's going to be a great movie. I cannot think of a producer or a director that would not be excited to put together the old clips, the old clips of movies that would be shown in the different locations in Eagle Grove, on the Calvin Coolidge, or even to have Pete Chavez, one of our characters, interacting with Sam as Sam is telling a movie, and that sort of thing. So it's from the very beginning, it lent itself with the multiple settings, and the Cecil B. DeMille numbers of people that are going to be in some of these settings. It just seems to be just kind of lined up that way, and it's a story that when you're reading it, you see it as it's going past, and so I just think that it's going to be some competition for different movie makers to try to get a hold of it.
Yeah, and I'll add this. The world changed. The world changed in World War II. Arguably, it changed after World War I, but before World War II, before the Vietnam War, before President Kennedy was shot, there was a certain naivete, there was a certain innocence that existed, I think, in the world, but certainly in this country. And that's really what this story captures, is it captures that innocence that existed during that period of time where young men and young women were just looking forward to graduating from high school, marrying, and running the family's dairy farm. And suddenly the country is hit by a Great Depression. People are losing their jobs left and right. They're abandoning towns. They're going wherever they can to try to find jobs. And then in the midst of all this horrible war breaks out around the world with Adolf Hitler and the Japanese military. And it just is horrific on so many levels. And the world changed. The world changed. And that's what is, I think, the thing that draws a lot of people to go to these movies is you see a world turned upside down, and you ask yourself, how can it ever be the same again? Right? How can we ever go back to what we once had when so much has changed and so many things are different? And what you come to realize is you can never go back to what was, but maybe you can create what is in a way that you're willing to, you want to live, in a way that you want to live. And I think that's sort of the beauty of this story, is that recognition that we can't have what we thought we wanted, but maybe we can have what we do want now.
And there's the other element is the anticipation and the hope that the story brings at the same time. I mean, we know that we often talk about the greatest generation, and that this generation, as Bob said earlier, needs to know about that generation and their level of sacrifice and their level of honor and faith that they took, and dignity. There's a whole lot of dignity wound into Hold Strong, and especially through the character of Father Tom, who cannot stand the fact that American soldiers would be discarded, that they lived and they loved, and even at their end they needed a dignified burial, and Father Tom dedicated himself also to the not only the living but also those that pass.
Thank you
Yeah,
both.
I mean, the ultimate sacrifice, right? Lay down one's life for another.
It is.
And you see that throughout this story in a number of characters that are willing to lay down their life so that others can live.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it goes back to that sense of love for your friends, family, country, God, and others. Thank you both for that. I was going to ask, why these World War II stories still matter so many decades later, why they're relevant today. And you've covered that pretty well. Feel free to add to it if you like. But as we head for the finish line here, before we open it up to the Q&A from the audience, I just wanted to ask what's next for you guys, if there's anything in particular you're working on. And then the last question will be, how can people stay in touch with you? Where can they get more information about you?
Well, why don't you go first? Because you're working on something, and I think getting in touch with you is important on a number of different levels for readers, especially your website.
Okay, sure. If you'd like more information about the book, you can hop over to my author website at jefflangholz.com. And there you can get historical photos, declassified top secret military documents, bonus chapters, and various other things at the website. You can learn about some of the key characters involved with the story as well. And boy, I've been bitten by the bug. I'm still embarrassed. I didn't know about this whole chapter of World War II history, the 134 prisoner transports, the hell ships. So 2 more of those stories are in the works. One is a ship that left Manila, Philippines a few weeks before our story starts. And another one left, that's the Shinyo Maru. And the other one left a few weeks afterwards from Manila. That's the Oryoku Maru. So I'm heavy into the research and writing for both of those stories. Who's next?
I'll jump in. Mine's pretty brief. I'm still very dedicated to my classroom setting. I suspect I'll continue teaching for the next several years and until I decide not to do it, not to teach anymore. In the meantime, I'll always keep my eyes open for the story to be told to my students, to get to motivate them to become deeper readers, writers, that kind of thing. And I'll also look for stories to tell on paper down the road. I do know personally that Hold Strong affected me greatly. I'm super happy, grateful that it is receiving these kinds of reviews. But it took a toll. It took a toll, and I don't think that I want to head back into that kind of. Although, yeah, I'm just not sure that I can tackle such a heavy story again.
I agree with Chris. When you finish a book like this, you close the pages and you immediately miss the characters. It's like you've lost good friends and you want to find out what happens to them. And for a writer, you need a little bit of time. You need a little bit of time off. I've been writing in between. I have another Tracy book that'll be coming out. It's I think 11th in the series, called A Dead Draw. I have the 3rd Kira Dugan book in the process of developmental edits. It's called Her Cold Justice. I just had a lunch with my editor and gave them an idea for what's coming next in terms of the next Kira book, and then in terms of what might be the next standalone book that I do. But right now, I'm just waiting for Chris to retire, because I'm down in Palm Springs hoping to make the senior golf tournament, and he says he'll caddy for me. So that happens. No, it's funny. Golf is a lot like writing in many respects. You never perfect it. You just try to have fun playing it. It's a game of imperfection, and that's sort of the fun of it, is it just exploring the good days and the bad days and trying to just get a good balance emotionally. But when you're a storyteller, like the 3 of us, it's kind of in your blood. And, you may say, I don't want to go back to it. And then 2 weeks later, you're in a bar with one of your friends and he says, hey, I got this story to tell you. You're getting another round of drinks.
Exactly. That's great. Thank you for that. And the reference to Chris golfing, Chris used to be a professional golfer, a member of the Professional Golf Association, and he once set a record for golfing the most holes in one 24-hour period. Every year for charity, to raise money for a local charity in Indiana, he would just golf for 24 hours straight. And he would have camera crews following him, and he'd make national news. He'd be on ESPN, top 10 plays of the day. He'd be like number 7, number 4, number 2. He golfed over 500 holes in one 24-hour period to raise money for charity. So he takes it pretty seriously.
16 hours, by the way.
16 hours. Oh,
16
slacker.
hours.
Slacker.
I used to, people would ask me what the course record was, and I would say 27 minutes.
Spectacular. Well, all right. With that, I think we'll hand it back to Robert, our host, and perhaps, Robert, you can lead the Q&A.
So, folks, if you haven't already and you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box or the chat box. I'll look at both. First question, and this one goes to you, Jeff. Do you have a list of recommended discussion questions for book clubs who might choose this as their next selection?
Absolutely. We've got a list of, I think, 15 questions. You can get them on my author website, jefflangholz.com. click on the menu item for book clubs and download the list in PDF.
Excellent. Next question is for all three of you. You mentioned that it took you 12 years of research, but how long did it actually take you to write the novel?
Well, that's an interesting question, Jeff. I guess, I mean, we started writing and researching at the same time. It was kind of simultaneous, and pieced together. So Jeff and I used to use kind of keywords when we would be in a chat together. Like my day job is dragging me down, and so we'd have to step away with both of us trying to be excellent at two careers at the same time. So I guess it took us a decade, Jeff. I guess it took a decade.
Pretty much. I think we both have full-time jobs and other commitments, and so we poked at it at nights and weekends when we could. I did at one point get really serious, and I decided to write every single day, and I had a streak, and the streak went for over a year, 370, 80 some days without missing a day, averaging 2 hours per day. When I add up the hours that I spent over those 12 years and compress them into 40-hour work weeks, it ended up being the equivalent of 2 years.
What's more impressive, writing for 380 straight days or golfing for 16 hours straight? Okay. All right. So next question goes to Edward, who asks, has anyone approached you for the movie rights? And if so, who could you picture playing your main characters?
You know, I don't know that we have agents that handle all that, so we'll have to wait and see what happens. I did receive an email from someone saying, do you know if anybody's bought the rights to this? And I forwarded that off to see, if it was a legit type of thing or not. So I'm not sure. I think that this is going to go down that path. I'm just not sure when. What was the second part of the question, Robert?
Who to play?
Oh, and I say this all the time. I have to ask my son and my daughter because, I love movies, but I'm at that point where I'm sort of a little bit out of it. I'll throw out the name Timothée Chalamet. Is just one of those actors who is young enough to play the part. He can play naive, and like he did in Wonka, and he can play, a little bit more sophisticated, like he did with Bob Dylan. And so, he's of the age, he's about the right size. He could play Sam Carlson. But beyond that, I don't know who any of these actors are anymore. I'm an old man.
I would like to read for the part of FDR. So if that.
There you go. That would be good.
Yeah. And I think my special talents suit me for a role. I'll be dead body number 4, or maybe dead body number 3. That's tailor-made for my skills level. Bob, speaking of movie rights and so on, you've written 30 books now. Roughly how many of those have been optioned by Hollywood for film or TV?
About 25. The thing is, it's a very long, drawn out process. It really is. And you can't write a book expecting that it's going to be a movie. You write a book because you love to write, and hopefully you write a book that you love. And this is a book that I love. I would love to see it become a movie simply because I think the more people it touches, the more people will understand the true atrocity that is a war. And we're hopefully, that old saying, you better learn history or else you're doomed to repeat it. And hopefully this will be something that sort of lets people know that, this is not something we want to repeat. You look at what's going on in the world and Ukraine and the talk about World War III, it should scare the hell out of everyone and anyone. And if it doesn't, then you need to read books like this to understand the atrocities that this really can mean for the whole world. So I hope it does become a movie for that reason.
So our next question comes from MJ. They ask, why do you all think that this part of the war isn't well known?
I'll take a first stab, and I'll just say, because what happened in Europe with Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler, to this day, it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe. It's hard. It was so horrific. To the extermination of the Jews. You go to Auschwitz, you go to the Dachau, and you walk through them, and you just think to yourself, this was real. This couldn't be real. How could so many people be overtaken by evil? And I think that because of that, I think that just shone a little brighter than what was going on in the Pacific. That's my explanation. Let the historians, may have a completely different take on it.
Chris, well, it's literally on the other side of the planet, for one thing. Europe is closer to, especially to the east coast of the United States, but the Pacific is so far away and so vast. But a lot of Pacific stories have been told. Steven Spielberg decided to do a whole series, I believe with Tom Hanks, called The Pacific, 10 parts, to get the story out there, give that theater the attention that it deserves. But even they did not talk about this mysterious chapter, the hell ships, these 134 prisoner transports that carried Allied POWs around the world. And I think it's because it's a hard story to tell and a hard story to hear. They call them hell ships for a reason.
Yeah, and there's also, the other thing that I kind of lost my train of thought. I was just slipped into to what Jeff was saying there. One of the other things is that many of the documents that Jeff uncovered a little bit more recently have been declassified themselves. So some of this stuff was just behind the curtain of security for a good long time. So as more documents become declassified, I suspect other stories are going to come out of that theater as well.
So I am in the process of listening to the book. I was hoping to have it finished by tonight, but it's a 14-hour book on Audible. You guys are killing me. So I'm on that 1.5 speed. But amazing book thus far, and I myself am going to be one of those people giving you a 5-star review on Goodreads. With anything positive, there's always negatives as well. An anonymous attendee asks, I acknowledge the hell ships and the war, the horrors of all that, but are you at all concerned about anti-Japanese backlash given the current xenophobic environment in which we all live right now?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We've thought a lot about this. There is this concern about Asian hate in the United States and xenophobia, and we thought carefully about that. And we want to emphasize that a lot of the POWs who survived the Pacific War came home and described very friendly Japanese soldiers who helped them survive, provided food, medicine. They would sneak comfort to them, friendly soldiers. And once you get down to that human-to-human level, they had this camaraderie with the American POWs. So we hope that this story does not inadvertently contribute to any kind of xenophobia against Japanese or Asians in general. We are telling a true story, though.
And I think the other thing is, you have to also take into consideration the incredible Filipino people that were so generous and so giving to American POWs and tried so hard to fight alongside them. We point out the Chinese heroes that existed that took American POWs risking death across country to try to save them, to try to get them to back to American hands. We really tried to tell a complete and whole story. But as Jeff said, boy, I wish we could rewrite history. Don't we all? If we could rewrite history, I'd write a history that didn't include the Nazis and didn't include Adolf Hitler and didn't include all the leaders of Japan. I think the other thing you have to keep in mind is there were a lot of really good German people that were stuck in a really horrific situation, and the same was true of the Japanese people. Mm-hmm. So this is in no way, shape, or form meant to be in any way, negative with respect to the Japanese people. It's a true story about the leaders at that time in their history, and the horrific things that they did, not only to American POWs, but also to their own citizens. Restrictions that were placed on them, what they could and could not do, what they could go and could not go. So, as Jeff said, that's no way, shape, form anything that we intended.
Sure. And to end on a positive note, Patricia says this was a wonderful presentation. I can't wait to read the book. Thank you all so much. And similar sentiments from Diane, who say, thank you, gentlemen. Very thoughtful and interesting conversation. Looking forward to reading your books. So with that, we'll start to wind things down. So Jeff, Robert, Chris, does anyone have any last words for the audience before we wrap things up?
Well, I just want to say thank you, Robert, for hosting us tonight and for facilitating the Q&A. And I also want to thank everyone in the audience for their support for public libraries, not just the Tewksbury Library, but across Massachusetts and beyond. Your support for libraries and for literature is very important. So we are, as people who love stories, we are grateful to all of you who are involved with stories.
Yeah,
I'll say the same thing. I'm grateful, very grateful for you having us and giving us an opportunity to bring this story, out into the world. And people ask me that all the time. They'll say they're a little embarrassed. They'll say, well, I get your book from libraries, and I say, oh my God, don't be embarrassed. The more people that put a hold on my book, the more copies of the book the library buys, so that they can service their patrons. I love libraries. I grew up in the Burlingame Library. That's where I found my love of writing and my love of stories, was in the Burlingame Library.
All right. Well, and Chris, you're muted. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah. No, I just wanted to say thank you to you, Robert, and thank you for everybody that tuned in and just encourage kids to read. Encourage kids to read. Buy them books as gifts, and as they age, get them reading glasses.
There you go. So, folks, let's give Chris, Jeff, and Robert a big virtual round of applause for a wonderful discussion. Thank you all for your thoughtful questions. Look for an email from me in the next 60 minutes with the recording, as well as information from Wellesley Books, where you can purchase a copy online. And please take the feedback survey as you exit the Zoom. So thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their night. Thank you, gentlemen.